Herzlich willkommen aus der Hessischen Landesvertretung zu dieser neuen Veranstaltung über das
event European Bauhaus. We are going to be speaking German here in a representation. I'm Hendrik Kafsack, I'm the correspondent for the FA here in Brussels. I will moderate today's event and ask a few critical questions about the new European Bauhaus. I'm going to be speaking to Ruth Reichstein from the European Commission. Give the ball back to Wiesbaden, to Hesse, in order to give the State Secretary Mark Weinmeister to give us a few introductory remarks.
Wunderschönen guten Tag, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Ich darf Sie herzlich begrüßen, auch im Namen meiner Ministerin Lucia Puttrich, zu einer weiteren Veranstaltung Livestream hier aus der Hessischen Landesvertretung in Brüssel. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie wieder zugeschaltet haben.
I'm very pleased that you've decided to join us. And today we are once again going to be talking about the subject matter, the European Bauhaus, the new European Bauhaus. In January, at the start of the design phase, we already had the event here with Ruth Reichstein, and I'm glad that we can now continue to discuss this topic as a sort of follow-up. Of course, we need to know what has happened during this time since January 2021, and what ideas have been presented to the Commission, how people in Europe see the coexistence of people, especially in the built environment, but also when it comes to the questions of future viability, digitalization and sustainability. All this, after all, should flow into the process of the new European Bauhaus. This is why I very much look forward to seeing what Ruth Reichstein is going to be telling us in her discussion with Hendrik Kafsack. But we in Hesse have a particular interest in this subject matter. Many in Hesse have been dealing with the topic, most recently during the Hessian Architects' Day, which featured this topic very prominently. We, as a state government, are also concerned about how we can advance the future of building, the future of our urban and rural development. On November 19th, at the award ceremony for particularly exemplary buildings in Hesse, State Minister Michael Boddenberg will provide an overview of what is planned in Hesse, how we are thinking about the future, and what our goals are in the areas of sustainability, digitalization, and urban development. It will therefore be extremely interesting to listen to Mr. Kafsack and Mrs. Reichstein, who was entrusted by Ursula von der Leyen to promote this topic. I look forward to finding out what has happened so far and what ideas have been received. I wish you a very interesting event. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinmeister. Well, what has happened? What ideas have been received? This brings us straight into the topic, but before we talk about this, I would like to introduce Ruth Reichstein. I'll call you Ruth because we've known each other for a long time. This has to be justified in the German context when you do not use the formal address. This is somewhat different to the English language. A long time ago, you were on the right side of the power, to put it this way. You worked as a journalist for Handelsblatt or for Taz. We also know each other from those days. You then switched sides and worked for the Green Party in the European Parliament, and you are now working in the European Parliament in the think tank, and I think it still is a think tank. I also have heard of think and do tanks, a new formulation somehow, but you now work in the think tank I.D.E.A and are responsible there for the new European Bauhaus. As always, dear audience, you can of course ask your questions by mail or by phone. You'll see the details on the screen. I therefore won't read off the email address and the phone number. Do seize this opportunity. I will try to ask every question posed by you, as long as it has to do with the subject matter we are discussing today. Well, where should we start? Last time we sat here together at the end of January and spoke about the European Bauhaus. This was at the beginning of the design phase. There are these different phases. It starts with design, then deliver, then disseminate, I believe. I'm not entirely sure what's meant with that, but let's have a look what the current state of affairs is. This was an idea by Mrs. von der Leyen, but perhaps before that a few words about copyright. Who actually had this idea? Mr. Schnellhofer said it was his idea and that the Commission stole this, to put it this way. I would say that he did not say that this way. There was indeed a meeting with Hans-Joachim Schellenhufer at the end of last year, at the end of the summer of last year, where he expressed that if we want to stop climate change, we need to deal a lot more with the built environment, with infrastructure, with buildings, because a gigantic part of the emissions comes from this area. Some people speak of about 40% on a global scale. So he presented this in a very convincing way, and then he also talked about his project, the Bauhaus of the Earth in Germany, and this then led to the new European Bauhaus. And as you know, Mr. Schellenhuber was in the high-level roundtable, or is also in the roundtable at a European level, and we work closely together with him. So there's no dispute as to who invented this, whose brainchild this is. Fair enough, I might have exaggerated a little bit because it was interesting. Of course, success has many parents, and I guess everyone wants to somehow claim some of the success. But let's talk about the design phase. If I've understood it correctly, we are still in the design phase, because at first the idea was to have this for 1 year. The design phase is actually over now. From January to the end of June, we collected ideas in the course of the design phase. But of course, we started a little earlier in parallel, and then during the summer, we processed all of this, we analyzed it, we took a look at what happened in our house, and then we expressed this in a so-called communiqué in September, where the Commission then stated, this is the European Bauhaus, this is the concept, this is what we intend to do. And it also, of course, included a number of concrete political initiatives, as well as provided information about future funding. And then there was also so-called prizes for new European rising stars, prizes for under 30-year-olds, and then others for more grown-ups, to put it this way. Let's take a look at the design phase. For the prizes, I noticed one thing. We received a lot from Italy and Spain. Only one prize went to Slovenia, to the east. And this immediately begged the question, is this one of these Western European projects? And perhaps the East still has other issues. Perhaps there the problem is at first how to heat up the flat without coal, even though this, of course, brings us straight into the subject matter. But was the East somewhat more reluctant in its participation? I could perhaps say a few things about the prizes, because this is much more linked to the voting systems than it is to the representation as to what was sent in. But let me say a few things about coal. Because, indeed, there is great interest, especially in the coal regions, in Lausitz in Germany, but also in Poland. There is a lot of interest in the new European Bauhaus, because they say, luckily, we are receiving financial support from Europe in order to bring about this transformation. But as a region and as cities, we define ourselves by this exit from coal. Many of the cities have been talking about this prominently. And indeed, a lot of people also feel lost now because they no longer have a purpose. And here, the new European Bauhaus, in addition to the financial means, can indeed help in order to see what can be done in towns now. How can they be worth living instead of only increasing energy efficiency in the houses? So this too is an approach that is working very well, also in Poland or in Slovenia. There's not only this prize winner, there's also architects and designers that have organized a number of events together with Austrians also with regards to the topic of the new European Bauhaus. So these were my preliminary remarks. But of course it is true that this new family member of the Green Deal, the European Bauhaus, it is true that in some countries where there are already more projects about this, this has perhaps led to more awareness than perhaps in Hungary or Poland. And a few words about the prizes. We learned our lesson. We wanted to be very participatory and open, and we had a two-step selection process. The first step was a so-called public voting, where the Spaniards and Italians organized themselves in the best way. They were the most successful from the onset, and it is true that next time we won't proceed in this way. We'll probably turn this around. We'll first have a jury that takes a differentiated look, perhaps, so that it doesn't only matter who is best in organizing themselves on social media channels, because this way we're only including the public in the second step, which perhaps we'll do next time. We'll do differently next time. This is something we realized during the European Song Contest, when you give the people too much determining rights. But indeed, it was about perhaps who organizes the clicks in the best way, without saying that these projects wouldn't have been worth voting for. But, well, perhaps we can go back to Eastern Europe, because the topic is very interesting. And it shows that, well, when it comes to the new European Bauhaus, it's not only about buildings, it's also about concepts, about new ways of living, which has been exemplified by the topic of coal. How far are you going into the East to bring it over there? When the feeling reigns that perhaps there's not that much knowledge about it in the Eastern European countries. Well, at the beginning, we had this expert group, which I spoke about. And in this expert group, we strengthened that part of Europe. Out of the 18 representatives in this body, we have 2 that aren't from European countries. So we have 16 remaining. Out of these 16, if I'm not mistaken, come from this area. 1 from the Czech Republic, 1 from Hungary, and also from Poland. Actually, we have a total of 4, says the speaker. So this was a conscious decision to do this because, well, in Brussels, it can somewhat be difficult because the people are in the countries, they are at a local level and can, of course, act differently. Especially during the design phase, we also ensured that we have events in these countries that we support, perhaps by having someone from the Commission be there, or we support it in the areas of communication and organization. And now with the Slovenian presidency, we also took a look at what can be done in this area. There have been a number of events about it too. And now, well, we are entering the next phase, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in due time. And here too, we are going to stay on this and also see how we can better disseminate information. Because when you ask architects, well, quite a few have at least heard of the new European Bauhaus. But I would doubt that this is something that builders or perhaps doctors know about. So indeed, a lot of awareness work remains on our side, and this is something we'll certainly be doing over the next month. And now, when you say that the architects know this term, this might be good, but this is less than what you wanted to achieve. If this only takes place in the silo of the architects, haven't you missed your point of creating much more awareness? Shouldn't urban planners and others have also been included more? When it comes to the architects, well, they, for the first time ever, felt addressed by Brussels. For the first time, they thought, okay, we too can play a role here when it comes to combating climate change, for example. And many are also working on this. This too is something I learned. It is often the architects that say in a project, well, let's do this in a more sustainable fashion, and who then have disputes with developers as to what can be done to render the whole project more sustainable. So we have a group of allies who we have neglected hitherto, and this is perhaps why there is such a high degree of enthusiasm for this project. But it is of course true, this is not to stay a pure architecture project. This isn't the intention. We've also found a lot of urban planners show interest in this. And I'm not only referring to Barcelona or Amsterdam, we are also talking about other cities and towns that perhaps haven't done such a great job thus far, or perhaps do not have the know-how. In Warsaw, for example, there's great interest in this. Prague also wants to do something with the new European Bauhaus. And I think this also shows that the European Bauhaus perhaps gives you access to other areas. I here have the list of the different projects that have been selected. Do you perhaps have a favorite project, one that where you would say, this is exactly what represents the new European Bauhaus, or is it more about the collection? Yeah, I would say that the diversity matters, but one thing the projects have in common is that these aren't projects by gigantic architecture companies or by these typical green cities. These projects are almost all grassroots projects. We have perhaps smaller developers wanting to build with more sustainable materials, or we have other groups that want to deal with the problem of unemployment. So we have a diverse group of initiatives that grew in the different locations. So the change is really coming as a bottom-up approach. And this is what we want to promote in the framework of this Bauhaus. So in the future too, this prize is intended to be awarded to initiatives that take place at a local level and that are worth supporting. Now perhaps we could talk about the next step, the delivery phase. In September, the Commission presented a communiqué. We heard about the laboratory of the new European Bauhaus, the so-called Think and Do tank. I fell in love with this term, which is why I'd like to repeat it as much as possible. So what exactly can we expect now? What is this laboratory supposed to do? Of course, we have 85 million euros earmarked for this, I believe. And money is, of course, always good. But, well, this project isn't only about money, it's about ideas. And the money is only supposed to support these ideas. Allow me to say a few things about the laboratory. Now, of course, the question is, how can we be successful in this change? In the construction industry, in our cities, and in all of the regions of the EU. And that is why we have this laboratory which we created at the heart of this new European Bauhaus. And in this laboratory, we wanted to get together with the community in order to have a participatory approach. We now have over 300 partner organizations in the framework of the new European Bauhaus. We have the high-level roundtable, and all of the prize winners are also part of this. You can, by the way, still become a partner if you want to join in. And here we want to devote our time to different workflows. Allow me to mention two as an example. First of all, during the design phase, we said again and again, there's so many regulations at a European but also at a national level that mean that the transformation are particularly difficult, also in the construction industry. We have some regulations from past centuries that are no longer appropriate with what you can build today with renewable materials. So there's going to be one group in the lab that is going to take a look at this and provide an overview, and then the Commission is going to say, okay, what can be sorted out at a European level is something we're going to take a look at, but we are also going to have discussions with the member states and tell them, well, Italy, for example, well, could you perhaps not change something here because this could help the green transition? That's the one thing. The other thing is that it became clear that we need to better define what the criteria are for the new European Bauhaus, for the buildings, but for all other things too, which is why we will certainly be developing a label for the new European Bauhaus where everyone can then check, okay, do I fulfill the criteria? And then I can also use the label and stick it onto the house or the shoe or wherever.
Then, regarding the work in the laboratory, how are these things taking place practically? Is it first of all a kind of virtual event? Is there a coming together to discuss face-to-face? So what are the practical aspects? Yes, indeed. Of course, first of all, we have our digital platform where people can do networking. And currently, the team is meeting on a weekly basis in order to see what will be the design of the laboratory to make sure it will work accordingly to the needs of this community. And then, I hope, if we will not get back in the kind of new pandemic, I hope that face-to-face meetings will also be possible. For the end of the year, we are planning a workshop with scientists regarding the research program Horizon Europe, where a lot of money is available. And there we want to take a look at if this program will support the Green Deal and Bauhaus, or would we need other core topics? And this will be the input for the Commission, for the Member States and for the European Parliament in order to negotiate this working program of Horizon 2020. And this is a really face-to-face meeting for a small group in Brussels. And I think this will how things will be going. We will not be able to get together all the 500 people participating in a very regular manner, but there will be small meetings with smaller group. And in June next year, we will have our first festival for the new European Bauhaus here in Brussels. And there will be the opportunity for the community to meet. Regarding money, I did not want to say that money is not important, but I wanted to say it's not the main approach. It's not that Brussels open up the wallet. It's just an instrument that is a kind of a companion factor. Or should we discuss this? Well, I think it's a kind of balance of both of them. It's not possible without funding programs. And of course, we are aware, if we say for these 5 first pilot projects, we will award 5 billion euros, then regarding renovation, urban development and so on, it's rather peanuts, okay? But these peanuts can be combined with fundings from other programs, like cohesion funds, funds for reconstruction, and so on. And therefore, the Bauhaus offers an additional financial incentive, but we are aware of the fact that we'll not be able to double the European budget. We have to work with the means available, and there the approach is, okay, how can we make smart combinations together with national and regional fundings too, in order to have a nice package. Regarding regulations, of course, it's a huge obstacle, as we could hear during the last month, and it's very interesting. If I take into account like fire protection regulations from the 17th century, yes, this is something we really want to investigate on. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I went to the Hessen Day for Architecture, where we were also talking about the new European Bauhaus and how to implement this in the state. And there, too, wood was a very important topic, and things are currently being revised in Hessen. So apparently things go into the correct direction. Okay, wood, and I have a question regarding wood. But 1 second, because I want to talk about the visibility. You have mentioned the festival beginning June of next year, and Kurt Gessert. And Mr. Gessert is frequently asking questions, so I hope I pronounce his name right. So the question is, have you been thinking about making the European House of European History more visible? This is his question. Yes, basically, yes. Of course, we appreciate every kind of support if it's adequate support, and we could examine these questions. But we must not forget, the new European Bauhaus is quite young. And first of all, it was very important to reach this first milestone, okay? To say, okay, this is the approach, this is what we want to realize, and now we can start our talks with possible cooperation partners to look what possibilities we have and how we can get their support. And the festival in June 2022, it would be a kind of meeting of all stakeholders, or is it still being elaborated? Yeah, the idea behind this festival would be to present the 3 dimensions of the Bauhaus here in Brussels. And the first edition would take in Brussels, and then we would invite our partners and our partner cities to have parallel events in other European cities. And we want to unite 3 components. So there will be classical conferences with experts talking about the different aspects. Then we will have a kind of fair part of this festival where companies with innovative products in this topic can present their projects and products. And then we have the idea from our awarding ceremony. We could have a kind of possibility for the rising stars to present their projects and to connect the sponsors with them. And then third dimension would be the cultural dimension, which would go very well together with the festival character, concerts, theater, exhibitions. So we have many very popular artists in our community, and this should be open for the wide public to offer another entry. Okay, so this would not be a one-day event, but no, it would be like 4 or 5 days. Now, talking about culture, the cultural aspect, and now talking about the materials. Frank Schreiber-Roth, former member of the European Parliament, is asking a question about the production of cement, and it's responsible for 8% of the worldwide CO2 emissions. And this is one of the huge questions, how to handle these emissions and how to bring these emissions to a lower level. And wood and clay would be one possible option. And then we have the Hamburg Harbor City quarter, where a foundation has built the highest wood building, or is currently building the highest wood building in Germany, up to 64 meters high with 190 housing units. Okay, so wood is at the very heart of this topic. And this is something in parallel with our historical Bauhaus. They also had to find new materials in order to handle the challenges of their time. They started building with concrete and steel. And today we have to use other alternatives. And of course, we will not be able to renounce on concrete and steel, but important is to diminish the CO2 production or CO2 emission during the production of these materials. And there we have the initiative of the cement industry within the framework of the European Bauhaus in order to check how this could be possible. But of course, we would also like to include more sustainable materials like wood, like bamboo, like clay. So everything the nature offers. And there we must make sure that this takes place and the production takes place in a very sustainable way. Since the new European Bauhaus really also wants to protect the European forest. We do not want to replace one problem by another. We also had the biodiesel. This looked like a very good solution, but actually it created many problems. So really we have to be careful that we do not replace one problem by another. But for the rest, of course, and wood is increasing. The wood sector is increasing in different countries, so this will be very interesting for us. And the potential, what is the potential of wood? How much cement could be replaced by wood? It sounds like a very interesting, exciting idea, but how could we scale this up? Well, this is a question Mr. Schellenhuber would be better placed to answer than me. I have no figures. I can't tell you this is the number of cement that could be replaced, but I think we have in the northern countries like Sweden, Finland, Denmark, it's much more common. And there we have companies using wood to have a kind of modular principle. So you are able to build a townhouse or row homes in wood. And there's not just one very interesting hip building like in Hamburg, which has a kind of front-runner character, but what is really important is to make these things more popular and to bruise them in a row. And for instance, in Sweden, we now have a whole location in wood, and it's really, these things are possible. And regarding isolation, it's actually very good if we compare this to the classic normal houses. Okay, it's not like building with wood and in wood and losing regarding isolation, which would reduce the positive impact on the environment. Okay, 1, 2 further questions from different topics. So I will not try to make a kind of bridge. So we have the question of Peter Benuska regarding the funding of the European Bauhaus. Would this get funding from the Funds for Regional Development? You will be talking about Horizon. Yeah, this is for our colleagues from DG Regional Policies. They are currently talking with the member states to negotiate the operative programs and to negotiate how these regional funds will be distributed and used, and to make some sensibilization work regarding the new European Bauhaus. So we do not want to oblige people to use these fundings for the NEB, but we want to make this possible. If a member state says, okay, here I have a perfect project for this kind of funding, it should be possible for the member state to ask for this funding. Okay, and then we have a certain part of this funding for climate protection and for the Green Deal, which would be a great connection, yes. And then Monika Benz from the Hessen Ministry for Financial Affairs. Here, she mentions the label you have been talking about. When can we expect this label, and who will be allowed to issue this label? And if I may complete, what would be the criteria, the conditions to get this label? Well, I don't have many details yet, since we are at the beginning of the work. We hope that end of next year, end of 2022, we will have a first edition of label we will be able to present. It's not that easy, since it's always the question how detailed this kind of label must be. We do not want to create an additional standard. We have so many different standards, and we will have another regulation by the Commission regarding energy efficiency and buildings and so on. So it's not a kind of doubling of a standard. So I think this label will fall back on existing standards instead of creating new standards. And now the question is how detailed these criteria will be. And I think we will start with building and environment, and then we can also transpose it to other products and projects. Okay, but this is really still at the beginning. Okay, and then next year we'll have the third Bauhaus event regarding the label, for instance. Yeah, I think you also want to highlight the creative approach. It's not only about the building, its efficiency, its construction materials. Yeah, of course, the creative part and the aesthetic part is very important. And the question is also, do we feel well inside this building? And regarding the social housing, efforts are being made, not enough efforts. Social housing is being insulated, and but it's not a building where you prefer, where you like living. And our Bauhaus really wants to cover this well-being also. And third aspect would also be inclusion. So the new European Bauhaus will not be limited to a happy few living in a nice wooden building close to the harbor of Hamburg. No, this should be really enlarged, accessible to all of us, and we don't need an additional sustainability label. We have enough of them. So, okay, my question now is there a danger of getting lost in all these different components of this approach? So there's not yet a concrete label or voting idea. No, there's not yet a decision regarding the concrete processes and so on. So this will be your work of the next month, yes. Regarding the construction materials, cement was very important during the last weeks. Okay, so it's wood, it's clay, and then suddenly Teflon was mentioned. Teflon, we only know from frying pans. Yeah, there we have a regulation at the European level. I don't know its name in German. It will be a kind of regulation on building materials. This regulation will be revised at the end of the year, and of course we take a look at this to make sure there is a kind of consistency, a kind of cohesion. But there, we have to say there's so many different texts, regulations, and we do not want to work in parallel. We just want to take into account what exists, and how can this European Bauhaus build things as we want them to be built. Okay, and then we will have the next phase. I think the next two phases will be kind of overlapping. Of course, when you start something new, you have to construct a kind of core, and then you have to grow. And this was the idea behind design and then delivery and then dissemination. But now things are going on in a parallel way. So I would not say that this delivery phase will end. I hope the European Bauhaus will exist for a very long time, and I hope that there will be an open end. Okay, this would be a nice conclusion, but we still have a few more minutes. Okay, this was the nice concept in the beginning: design, then delivery, then dissemination. But finally, it's a concept as a whole, and the design phase is not yet finished. Yes, but it was a very precise phase. It was from our communication until the fixing of the concept, and now this concept is fixed, so the design phase is finished. But this does not mean that all our tools and everything we use during the phase is we forget about this, okay? And I think it's a kind of communication of 19 pages, only 19 pages. So we still have to work on this. We still have to make the Bauhaus grow, and we still have to add some levels. And the main work would be where we have been talking about building materials, about architecture, about the changing of whole regions, like coal regions in Lausitz, or in the Ruhr in Germany, Bochum, and so on. We have seen it takes decennia to change this society, to change this community. So what would be the point you say, okay, here really have to put our effort on? Yeah, I think I will not fix myself or limit myself to one topic, but let me mention, yesterday I received a study from Austria where people were questioned regarding the Green Deal, and more than 50% said that Green Deal will not be reached by regulations and standards. It also requires a cultural change, and this is what I would highlight most. It is very important to talk with the people, to get them on board, to explain the positive impact of this Green Deal approach, be it in our cities, the air in our cities, the soil or the water. It's much more than only CO2 limits for cars. So this must not only be seen as a kind of economic or environmental projects. It's a project of our community, of our society, which must not be put on the people from a top-down approach, but it has to grow from the roots. And this is something we want to try with our new European Bauhaus in order to create a kind of ownership, if I may say so. It's not only about accepting and implementing the rules from Brussels. It should be more than this. Okay. 2 questions regarding the state of Hesse. The possibilities for the state of Hesse to take individual initiatives and make them visible, since the state of Hesse is not yet a partner of the NEB. Yeah, indeed. We open the door only to non-profit organizations and not to political actors, but we are currently examining this approach, since we must be accessible for political units, let's say, like villages, cities, and so on, and also for companies. So there will be next steps regarding this topic. And regarding the visibility, we would love to get projects from Hess, and very interesting to know, it's not only about the one and only pilot project. There are really projects for citizen initiatives, for startups, for social housing, and of course for these huge pilot projects. And so we hope that we can help everybody, that we will have a solution for everybody and for every different level. And this would be a very concrete possibility to participate. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, when I was at the Day for Architecture in Hessen, I said we would be very glad to get your input. If you say, regarding our construction regulation, we are really progressive, take a look at it. Okay, so send it to us, and then we could integrate this in our working group for regulation. So we are really open and looking forward to input from every side. So no regulation for fire protection from the 17th century. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this discussion. Next phase of the new European Bauhaus will start, and maybe we will have the Bauhaus label, not only the Hessen logo, but also the Bauhaus label, where you can play one or the other project. 8th November, we will have our next event, 1 p.m. It's a crisis talk, European Union and the Indo-Pacific area, a common strategy in the crisis. It's a very up-to-date topic. Okay, thank you very much for your participation. It's nice weather. Go outside, do a little walk, and then have a nice day. Thank you.